C. Okay, our inventory is full. If I press C again, it should come up with can't craft. And that's what it did. Fantastic. Welcome back everyone to the inventory tutorial series. In the last episode, we set up using items. So now each item does its own unique thing. So this one will swing its tool and whatnot. What I really want to set up today is the crafting system. So realistically, crafting works different in every game. So for me to create a separate tutorial for every single type of crafting system is impossible. And it's also very limiting because then you guys don't know how to make your own unique crafting systems. So as always, I'm going to create a nice modular system that you can drag and drop into any project, and I'm going to show you guys how you can customize it into fitting different types of crafting systems. I'm going to show you guys how to do that at the end of the video, so stick around. This is going to be a bit of a longer video today because I want to get the entire thing done. So we'll see how we go. So first things first, just to keep track of our items a little bit better, what I'm going to do is give them an icon. So at the moment, all of them appear like this. I've already done Apple just as a test, but all of them appear as this default icon. We're going to change that really quick. So if I go consumable class, for example, and just change this to and whatever color you want, you can even select your own image if you wanted to. I'm just not going to do that for the moment being. For the time being, I'm just going to make them, let's make everything green. So we'll make that green. We'll make tool classes also a green diamond. I'll make spawn swords also green diamonds. Miscellaneous as well. And you can give these all different colors depending on the item if you wanted to. Again, this has no impact on anything. It's just to keep track of it a little bit better for your own pleasure. So if I go to items now and I just refresh all of these, re-import them, or select all of them and then say re-import, you'll see that all our items now are green diamonds, and that just lets us know exactly what is an item and what isn't. And that's going to be important because we're going to start creating our crafting recipes. So I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'll just call this crafting recipe class. And then open that up in Visual Studio or your code editor of choice. Okay, so let's go from the top. If I open up just an item class script and drag that over here, just so I have access to it. Okay, so our crafting recipe is going to keep track of, well, it's just going to be essentially a crafting recipe. So what it's going to do is define how our crafting works. And in essence, the way crafting works is you combine one or more items with certain quantities together. So fortunately for us, we already have a class which combines a quantity and an item together, that being our slot class. So what we can do is in our crafting recipe class, I'm going to create a public slot class array of, let's say, input items. Okay, this is now going to inherit from type scriptable object. And let's create an asset menu for this. So I'll say create asset menu, file name equals, let's call it, let's just call it crafting. And then close crafting recipe, new crafting recipe. And then menu name is going to, this is the important one, let's say crafting / recipe. Very nice. And then what we need to do is have another public slot class for output item. That should be enough for us for the moment. I'm just going to create a header for this and say crafting recipe, just to make our inspector look a little bit nicer. And the other thing I probably have to do is, okay, that's already system.serializable. Okay, so let's leave it as this for now. Let's head back into Unity. And what I want to do is click on crafting recipes and give this a blue diamond. Okay, now if I go to my items folder and I go right click, create crafting recipe, you'll see we have a blue diamond. So let's call this a crafting recipe for torch, for example. We have a few things here. We have input items and an output item. So for example, input items for a torch would take in an item class being coal, and let's say it takes in one coal, and it would also take in another item, which we don't exactly have at the moment. So let me create another item, item miscellaneous, and let me call this wood. Cool, item name is wood, A stackable sprite. Let's give it a nice wood sprite. If we have wood, we don't actually have any wood sprites. That's always good. I'm just going to give it wheat because I can. I don't have enough sprites to make this work nicely. But that's fine for our purposes at the moment. So this is going to take in wood. Take in 1 wood, and the output item is going to be a torch. Well, you know what? Let's do something else. Let's make this a crafting recipe to craft a sword. So we'll output 1 sword by taking in 1 wood and then 1 stone. So let me also create stone. So let me, or even iron. It doesn't really matter what you want to make this out of. I just have iron here. Cool. Just gonna call iron. It's stackable, fantastic. And let me call this iron underscore sword, or just iron sword. Perfect. And I'll also create an item for the iron sword. It's a tool. Cool. It's a weapon. Perfect. And it can have this sprite. That's a diamond sword. Iron sword. Cool type weapon. Cool. And now the iron sword recipe. We know it's a recipe because it's blue. We'll just output the iron sword. Okay, so that defines our crafting recipe. And it should actually take an iron. So now we have the ability to define crafting recipes, and you can create as many of these as you want. That's completely up to your own discretion. However, we need a way to actually use this. So inside my inventory, what I'm going to do is just reference a list to keep track of every single crafting recipe we have. So I'll have a serialized field, private list of crafting recipes, which is called crafting recipes equals new list of type crafting recipes. Okay, and now we can add in all our crafting recipes into this list. So I can drag and drop my, not that one. I can drag and drop the iron sword recipe into that list, and it appears here. Fantastic. So now we have the ability to craft an iron sword if we code it in. So let's do that. I'm going to create a few functions in our crafting recipe class. One of them returns a bool. So I'm going to have a public bool can craft, which is for now just going to return false. And then I'm going to have a public void craft, which technically should remove the input items from the inventory and then add the output item to the inventory. So, and this should just return if inventory has input items. So in our inventory script now, what we actually have to do is write a contains method, but we actually already have a contains method and it just returns the wrong thing. So I'm going to create another contains method by just duplicating this. This one's going to return a bool, and it's going to give you an error at first saying it already contains a member called contains, which is quite ironic. And that's because we can actually name it the same thing. We just have to give it another parameter. So I'm going to call this item class item, and I'm also going to give it an int quantity. So now we're also checking if it contains an item at a specific quantity, and then return false at the end because you can't return null. Return items that, return true. This should be cool. Okay, so for int I equals I less than item slots. No, items is slots, right? Yeah, it's a slot class. Items length. If items idle get item equals item, and items I dot get quantity is equal to quantity or greater than or equal to quantity, then return true. That means we have enough of that item. Now, can craft is going to take in a inventory manager inventory, and same with craft inventory manager inventory. Fantastic. Now, if cancraft, what we have to say is if inventory, what we'll do, let's create a temporary variable at the top, bool cancraft equals true. So by default, it can craft. At the end, we're going to return cancraft, but we actually need to set this. So what we're going to do is use a pattern. So this is a common pattern you use in many programming languages. So what it's going to do is going to loop through, and if any of the cases don't match, then it's going to set cancraft to false, and at the end we're going to return a false. And you'll see how this works in just a second. So I'm going to say for let's say for int I equals 0, I less than input items dot length I plus plus. This is looping through all of these input items. We're going to check if inventory dot contains, and it's going to take in an item class item, and you see we have another overload here that we can click. So it takes in an item class item or an int quantity, and these both return different things. This one returns a slot class, this one returns a bool. Kind of cool. So if it contains input items I dot get item and input items I dot get quantity, if it contains it, then obviously we can craft, right? But cancraft is already true, and that logic really wouldn't work here. So what we have to do is actually do the opposite of this. If it doesn't contain it, then cancraft equals false. And it should be this one. So how does this work? Well, there's actually another way you can write this. It might actually be better. Let's say return false here, and at the end return true. And then we don't need cancraft. There you go. So what this is going to do is check every item in our inventory. If our inventory doesn't contain the item at that quantity, then return false. We cannot craft this crafting recipe. Otherwise, then if we didn't return false, we finished the loop. That means every item does exist at the quantity that we need. So return true. We can craft this item. And our inventory is going to use that later on to say if we can craft, then craft. Craft is going to say well, it's just going to do the same thing as this. I'm just going to copy paste that. That was way too much of a hassle. Okay, so inventory dot remove, and we're going to remove. We only have one overload for remove, right? Yeah, we only have the one overload. Let me create another overload for remove, which is going to remove item int quantity. Okay. Sub quantity, not sub quantity 1. We're going to sub quantity quantity. So to remove this. Items are item this, and the rest of that should be okay. Refresh UI. Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. That should work. So in here, I can then say inventory.remove items, input items I dot get item, and the quantity removing is input items I dot get quantity. So now we're subtracting exactly what we need to subtract for each input item. So it's consumed them. And then obviously we need to add the output item. So we're going to say inventory dot add, and it's going to add output item dot get item, and the quantity output item dot get quantity. Okay, and that's pretty much a crafting system done. I mean, that is pretty much the entire crafting system done. It basically checks if we have the input items. If we have the input items, then you can craft it. When we go to craft it, it's going to subtract all our input items and add the output item to the inventory which we specify. So since we specify an exact inventory, you could also make this crafting system expand over different, if you wanted to input it straight into a chest or something. So yeah, let's see here what we can do. I'll need a method to handle the crafting for us, but how may I write that in a way which makes sense to everyone? I don't really want to go into the user interface of crafting, seeing as it is going to be different for everyone. But what I can potentially do, wood 1, iron, miscellaneous 1. Okay, let me first add this into the start items. So we'll add, let's add iron and wood. Give us 3 iron, and we'll give ourselves 4 wood. Okay, when we first start the game. So if I press play, first thing that should happen, we should have 3 iron, 4 wood in our inventory. Yes, we do. 3 iron, 4 wood. Wood obviously being wheat because I can't afford sprites. Now when we go to craft it, what I'm gonna do, just to make this super straightforward for everyone, I'm gonna bind a key to do all the crafting for me. So this key is going to be an event, which you can call from wherever in your code. For me, I'm just going to say if input.get key down, and this is very similar to our interaction system. So where I just binded a key to it for example purposes. So if you press keycode.c, we're going to handle crafting. What this should do is call a function, which is going to say craft. So I'll have a private void craft. And it should take in the crafting recipe class recipe. Okay. Now, since I only have one crafting recipe loaded, this is pretty straightforward for me. I'm just going to say craft, and I'll say crafting recipes 0. So it's just going to craft the first recipe in my list. And what that's going to do is say recipe.craft. Well, if we can craft first. So if can craft, then recipe.craft. And we have to pass in this because it asks for an inventory, obviously. So if we can craft into this inventory, sorry, let me explain that again. If we can craft using this inventory, then craft the item into this inventory. That's what the this does because we pass in the inventory. Now, if we can't craft, then usually you'd say a message in your game. So, for example, show error message in your user interface. For my purposes, I'm just going to say debug.log can't craft that item, because I don't have the user interface set up for that. It's completely the backend, so that should actually work in theory. We say craft recipes this. So what you would actually need to change in your code is this main bit. I'll show you guys that this works first, and then I'll explain how you can modify this to fit different styles of inventory. It's quite tough to make one inventory for every type of inventory system. So crafting system. So I have a crafting recipe here. Let's press play. Okay, so obviously, if I press C, it consumed the iron and the wheat and gave us a sword. It gave us another sword because sword is apparently stackable. Let me fix that really quick and run this again. Okay, so if I press C, it consumes the iron and the wheat and gives us a sword. If I press C again, it gives us another sword. And this sword as well, by the way, if I put it into my hotbar and I press E, you'll see we can use it as well. I'm just pointing that out. If I press C again, we craft it, and you'll see we have no iron left. So if I went to press C again, can't craft the item, and we don't get the item used, and the item doesn't get consumed. We don't get an item added. Instead, we get the error message popping up. That's it. That's the crafting system done. And the other thing is as well, let's say I had a bigger crafting system, crafting recipe, so it doesn't only take up wood and iron, but it also takes up, let's say, some coal. So let's say creating iron sword takes up coal as well, because you use it to, I don't know, burn the iron. If I went to press C now, you'll see it also consumes coal. So these should all be subtracted. 2, 3, 4 should become 1, 2, 3, and it does. And we get a sword in the process. That's crafting. So how do you actually modify this to actually apply to every type of crafting system? Well, that depends entirely on how you decide to lay out your user interface. A common method would be to simply show every crafting recipe, sort of like how Terraria does it. Have everything as a button, and you can click that button to craft that recipe. There's a number of ways to set that up. I'm not going to go too far into it because that is delving a bit more into the user interface side of things, and it kind of detaches from this having this crafting system apply for every type of thing. What the main thing you really want to focus on is having an event, right? So obviously, if input.get key down, that's an event. It occurs, and what it does is it crafts a recipe. This recipe can be whatever you want it to be. The crafting recipe, from in my case, is just the first index in this list of recipes, but it can be anything. So let's say I was talking to an NPC, and talking to the NPC should he should craft using my items or something. The NPC can then call this function with a crafting recipe, and it should handle all of that for me. I hope that makes sense. It is a bit, the whole system with a little bit of modification should be able to be applied to any sort of inventory and crafting system that you have in your games. Again, the main thing is just calling this function. Once you call this function, our code handles everything else entirely. One thing I do want to check out though is a potential error, which is when we craft, what happens if we don't have enough space in our inventory? That is an issue, isn't it? So that will be in our can craft method. What I should actually add to the inventory utils method is a function which returns bool if the inventory is full. So public bool is full, and at the end it should return false. And this is going to use a similar pattern to what we did here. Notice how I mentioned there was a pattern. It's actually the exact same sort of method. We're going to loop through all our items.length. If items dot get item, if items I dot get item is not equal to, if it's equal to null, that means we have an empty slot. Wait, what? Yeah, there we go. If items I dot item equals null, then return false. That means it's not full. Otherwise, return true because it is full. Okay, and then our crafting recipe, I can also say, before we do all this, first check if we actually have space in our inventory to craft. And what that's going to do is say if inventory dot is full, then return. Let's return false. The inventory is full, therefore we cannot craft. This is going to be a bit hard for me to test, but it should work. If it doesn't work, let me know. I'll fix it in a future video. But yeah, so that should work essentially. Actually, I could probably test it. Let's test it. Let's give myself a ton of iron and a ton of wood. And let's get rid of it so we don't need to craft that. If I craft enough iron swords, then it should get to a point where we cannot craft anymore. There we go. So C. Okay, our inventory is full. If I press C again, it should come up with can't craft. And that's what it did. Fantastic. And it no longer consumes items until I obviously remove a sword from my inventory. So yeah, success. We have a crafting system, and you can make it so you can craft whatever you want. Obviously, that's completely up to you with your the user interface that you design. If you guys want me to go into the user interface in the next video for crafting, let me know. Happy to do that. I can create a standard crafting system UI, which you can apply to your projects. Apart from that, that's the main backend done. So feel free to drag and drop this into whatever projects you want. It should work very smoothly with the inventory system. That's it. That's it from me, guys, for today. I'll catch you in the next video. Take care and peace.